Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Welcome to all the assembled devotees. I offer all of you my respectful obeisances and would like to share with you a little tour of what the history was like during Srila Prabhupada's days when he was teaching his disciples. So many of you have probably your own collections of unique items that were acquired during those days. And my question is for all of us, are all of these very unique things going to end up in a dumpster when we all leave because nobody took the time to try to preserve them for history? So I'm going to share with you one of the things that I've accumulated, which I feel is maybe worth preserving for generations from now to show what it was like before the information age. The computer industry didn't really start until the 1980s, and it took a while for all these personal computers to end up on everybody's desk. But now I'm going to show you what it was like before those days. So devotees had a variety of ways to memorize scriptures, and for myself and several others, they used small notebooks like this, and they would write their verses and their notes and things in these little notebooks, and they would carry it with them everywhere that they went, and that was a good technique was used. And similarly, some of you people who, some of the devotees that are out there right now might actually still have those notebooks, and you might even be cherishing them still to this day, and I suspect they're very dog-eared and very beat up, but they do show the kind of things devotees did in order to study Srila Prabhupada's books. So if you happen to be involved in one of the BBT productions or Back to Godhead magazine and you were around printing presses a lot, then you might have had the opportunity to put together a little collection like this one right here. So you would see somebody put this together. They had the ability to, they had access to some paper that had the Bhagavad Gita purports and the Sanskrit and then the Roman Arabic transliteration. Then on the back it had the word for word. Basically it was a very small indexed version of just the verses from Prabhupada's books. And in this case, this one is Bhagavad Gita 240. In this endeavor there is no loss or diminution. A little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous types of fear. So this was somebody's collection of verses that they studied. So similarly, we went forward in time. The technique that I adopted for doing this sort of thing was to put everything on index cards. So my version of that would look something like this. I had access to either probably an old Bhagavad Gita that had been torn or ripped or abused in some way, but some of the places were still useful, so I took advantage of that, and I created my own little collection of memory cards that I could then use and pull out of my pocket whenever I wanted to study the verses and become more familiar with the contents of the Bhagavad Gita. So that was the technique that I started using. And then in some cases, when I didn't have access to a particular verse, I would then write my own index cards, which is what we have here. These are some examples of the different index cards that I used. You can see here, this is predominantly chapter 9. So on the front side had the English, and then if I wanted to really understand this, on the front side was the English, such as this. As the mighty wind blowing everywhere always rests in ethereal space, know that in the same manner all beings rest in me. Chapter 9, text 6, there's the actual title of the chapter. And then on the back, Yagyasta Stito Nityat Yatakasha Stito Nityam Vayu Sarvatra Gomatan Tata Sarvani Bhutani Matstyanti Upadaraya. So I was able to actually study the Sanskrit, and then I had the word for word underneath it, so I knew exactly which one was. So this is the way I did it. I started collecting lots and lots of verse cards like this. And then I would put them in a very nice pouch, such as this right here is a nice plastic pouch. and then I could put them, I don't have a pocket really on this shirt, but I usually have some, I was usually working, had some kind of a shirt pocket that I could put it in. And then whenever I was working, I could just pull it out. And if I was sitting in a train station or sitting on a bus, or even if I was stirring sweet rice for the temple feast, I could put it up and set it right there, and I could go over it, and I could remember it over and over and over again. And this is the way that I eventually learned how to memorize 200 verses from the Bhagavad Gita, key verses. I believe Prabhupada said at some point, if devotees go to India, you just know a few verses, the Indian public would be very, very impressed. And actually, I did find that out myself. I think most devotees who were in India knew that if you could just chant a few verses in Sanskrit, the Indian public was very, very, immediately took notice and was quite impressed. So, here we go. So as I collected more and more of these cards, hold on a second. I had to find a way to keep them. And the way I kept them was in a little small recipe box like this. So all these cards would fit very nicely into my recipe box. And then when I wanted to study them, I would take one out and put it in my pocket for that day or that week or however long I wanted to concentrate on it. And I would have access to it. And I was able to keep them all very nicely in my little recipe box. Eventually, I had the opportunity to go to Vrindavan in 1976. It was a big initiation with all my godbrothers from Radha Damodar, where I got initiated. Very wonderful ceremony. But before I left, I purchased a small Samsonite, like this one right here. And started realizing that I might outgrow this if I kept working the way I was working. So, I did outgrow the small recipe box, and so eventually, before I left, I did some handiwork on the Samsonite and kind of turned it into a card catalog, like what you would see in a library. So when I got to India in 1978, my daily program was to rise up at 2 a.m. and chant my rounds before Mongol Artik, and then I was free to study Srila Prabhupada's books and make my little note cards as much as I wanted to. And eventually, this was all before the Bhaktivedanta Folio was produced, and I collected lots and lots of topics. On the rare occasion where I gave a Bhagavatam class, I would even make a little index card like that, which would be like my little notes that I'd keep with whatever I was doing, and it would have all the little notes related to what I wanted to speak of on. And so in this way, my little card collection just kept on growing, growing, growing. Let me show you what eventually occurred. I had to transfer from my recipe box to my Samsonite, which looked like this. And you can see it was also doubling as an altar. It had Hare Krishna, it had Srila Prabhupada, it had Lord Jagannath, it had Lord Chaitanya. And it had a little convenient, many of you know I do kind of like engineering things. I wanted to have a nice, clean, sharp drawing board, and I could do some clean drawings on this little drawing board. But of course, the real purpose of this was to keep my collection of index cards, which eventually grew and grew and grew. And here you can see a collection of what the index cards are like. So if we look carefully here, we can see each one of these cards are carefully, you're standing in your own light. It says cooperation, creation, contentment, satisfaction, fear. Then it says freedom, liberty, and independence. And then over here it says festivals. So each one of these cards had a similar kind of a tab telling me what the subject was or what the contents were of what it was that I was actually trying to catalog. But the question that came up, or the problem that came up, was how do you keep track of all this? Because lots of times, you know, you don't want to have an index card for every simple little thing. So I had to create an index. And so this was the index here. And you can see here, these are the index cards right here. And of course, they also had the initials for each of the Prabhupada's books so that I knew exactly which books I was talking about. And then this also gave some information. I'll go into this a little bit later. These are the things I used. But the basic part, the most important part of this was, and it's a little hard to see because remember this is 40 years old. I did it in pencil so that if I had to stick something in, I could erase it and move it around a little bit. But these are the index cards that informed me of where I could find something. So for example, let's say I wanted to look up something like foolishness. So I would go to the EFG, it should be right here. Now on this card, I actually took the time to rewrite it so it's a lot clearer so you can sort of see what each one of these cards look like. And here is the way the foolishness card would look. And I would go down, I would look for the, there's fear, festivals, fighting, fitness, food, and then there's foolishness. But the foolishness, you'll notice, had a second listing underneath it, which says ignorance. So that tells me that everything that I cataloged for foolishness was actually under a card that would be titled ignorance. So let's go look in the catalog here to see if we can find that particular tab. And let's see here. And what I would do is I would take a place card, one of these place card holders here, and the place card would then be held in my hand till I found what I was looking for, which happens to be over here. So H-I-J-K, oh, here is foolishness, ignorance, foolishness. So this is I, me, mine, I's come before F's. So there's the ignorance, foolishness tab. Looks like I drew a little dunce cap on the tab. Sometimes I put a little art on each one to help find them. So let's pull this stack of cards out. And then I would replace that stack with this little place holder. So later when I wanted to put it in, I'd know immediately I wouldn't have to spend the time trying to figure out where it was. I just look for that and put them in. So here's the cards on foolishness. And if we look closely at these stack of cards, you'll see that actually there's 5 cards. There's 3 cards here that apparently I ran into Prabhupada's explanation of the 5 kinds of ignorance in several different places in his books. And I probably didn't realize I already had a card on it. And also he's describing it both in Sanskrit, as these 2 cards are showing here, the second 2 cards, and also in ignorance. So one of the kinds of ignorance is accepting the body to be oneself. I won't go through them all, but you can see them there. So then the next thing that was also in these collections was the verses in the Bhagavad Gita would be there, indicated usually by a star. And then the green would indicate very quickly, so I didn't have to read the whole verse. I can immediately see fools deride me in this case. I don't know how clear it is on the camera. But in green, it told me immediately what was on the contents of this particular card. And so that would be there. In this case, it says Krishna destroys ignorance. Okay, that's a form of annihilating foolishness. 3 modes of ignorance. So in this case, these are all Bhagavad Gita verses. These are Srimad Bhagavatam verses, as clearly indicated along the top. And again, it had the green telling me quickly, so I didn't have to read the whole verse. If I wanted to find it, boom, I just looked there. It would go through like this, more Srimad Bhagavatam verses. And in this case, here's a class card that I apparently gave in August 12th on 1983. And it was from Srimad Bhagavatam 5:18, verses 5 and 6. And these are the notes that I took to give that class. So that's an example of a note card. And then I had this kind of collection of just random places in Prabhupada's purport where he talked about, in this case, this is all about ignorance. Again, the green tells me quickly what's on that card. There's several here. There's one about forgetfulness, which is a form of ignorance. And then we have here more on ignorance. You'll notice there's a K and an S and another K. I had a couple different ones of these. There's an R. I pointed out when I first brought the index out, I was showing you how these all represent different things. So, for example, K was a list of karmis. These are notes. And you'll see here, this is taken out of a magazine or something that I was reading. I'll explain that in a minute. R was a realization, and S was a something Srila Prabhupada specifically, a scripture, I can't remember what it is. It's something, stories. There's stories, and Prabhupada would tell a story. So now the question is, people will say, well, where did I get all this from, and why did I waste my time collecting it? Well, actually, my father had a subscription to Forbes magazine, and there was a page in Forbes magazine. It was kind of like the Time magazine for business and investing, and he would always send me the page of the Forbes magazine that had what they referred to as thoughts on the business of life. So I got these every month. So in some cases I cut them out and I said, well, that's a nice thought too, and I put them in there. I was really pretty absorbed in this, as you can imagine. And I thought, well, let me send in a thought on the business of life to Forbes magazine. I believe I sent in Matra Sparsastu Kunteya, chapter 2, text 14, I believe. The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the winter and summer seasons, and one must learn to tolerate them. So I sent it in. They actually published it in Forbes magazine, and then about 6 months later, believe it or not, Forbes magazine sent me a copy of their book, which was the collection of all the things that they had published for a couple of years, I guess. Actually, they sent it to my father, who was very surprised to receive it. And it was just a kind of neat little thing to know that Krishna made his debut in Forbes magazine. So eventually, as time went on, we'll put these back the way we found them into the section with my convenient place card holder here. And put these all back in here. So over time, with all of these cards coming in, as you would suspect, I really just started really kind of outgrowing everything to the point where even my Samsonite was no longer capable of holding my little personal library, having outgrown that, and then having outgrown this. So I went into the New Market in Calcutta, where they made these sort of things, and you can see here, this is the equivalent of a Indian Samsonite, obviously, because there's a lot of rust here. This is actually the same attaché that I bought at the time, and I ended up doing the exact same thing that I had done with the American Samsonite, and I created another traveling altar, such as this one, with Jagannath, Krishna, Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya, the gifts of His divine grace. It's just a little artistic expression. It's kind of an altar. And then I continued to increase my library, which now was expanding more than ever. I'll keep that open so you can see the whole thing. And but I had also added a new section, which were by letters, because these are all by topics. So by letters, if I wanted to look up a particular subject, I would look under the letter. So, for example, here's a place card that I put here before. Let's pull this out. It will give us an example of what's under the M's. And in this section, of course, first would be all of the major personalities, in this case, Madhvacharya and Mahatattva, and what's this one here? Maharatas. So I was trying to learn all these terms. For us in the West, all these Sanskrit words are completely new. Manos, the different manos. Actually, I think I have one of them here that tells me what all the different manos are. I don't know if I have it right here, but at some point I listed down all the manos, and then manvantars, and then here's one on Matsyavatara. And another thing I started to do, Marichi, was I started adding pictures. So if I had pictures of the personalities, then I would also put them in here. You can kind of get a sense of this. And eventually, as they became less prominent, I even started collecting all of the Sanskrit words so that I could learn the Sanskrit, what each of the Sanskrit words meant. You can see here some examples in the green and blue of how those words were studied.
Show a card with a picture.
Well, here's a card of the picture. I say, here's Madhvacharya, and there's a little thing somebody handed me of Madhvacharya. Apparently that's his deity in South India. Here's another picture of Madhvacharya to help me remember who these people were. And Madhvacharya, of course, was well known for putting his two fingers up like he's showing in this. No, there's not one ultimate, one concept of Godhead, the Brahman. He said there's two. There's the Supreme Lord, and then there's the individual. There's a relationship there. So anyhow, so that's what the M's were like in this index. That is, and then you can see here. Now, for this little video that I'm making, I couldn't actually put all the cards in here. And eventually, over the course of time, even this case became very quickly filled up. And I found myself also finding that there were very nice, convenient, I had all sorts of things that I was involved in India, building the Samadhi and so forth. And I found that in India, they had produced a whole bunch of little mini books. And lo and behold, they happened to fit my index card box perfectly. And there were encyclopedias and dictionaries and all sorts of references like that. And when I came to America, now I had a third box that was like this that has been repurposed. And when I finally came to Ojai, I didn't want to keep using these index cards. It was a little clumsy. So then I made this big oak box here. And you can see I moved them all out to put them in here to show you, but this is actually handled to continue. Here's some of the cards I didn't put in the exhibit today. And also one of the other things that I had in my little library, these were really big back in the early days because people didn't have what do you call it, hand phones with every calculator you could possibly imagine. They would use things like this. So if you wanted to make a quick conversion from metric to English, which was something I had to do quite a bit, length, weight, area, volume, and I had a few different versions of these and a few other cards. I had one in here that shows what how many cubic yards you'd need to make a wall if it was so thick and so long and so forth. So these are really convenient things. They were also part of the collection. But finally, here's all the books that I eventually collected. You can sort of see the different titles here. More cards that I put over here just because they didn't fit there for this video. And then this became the permanent home. So the purpose of this video is to share with the devotees. Also, I should probably point out here, this was indexed, when I got to this here, I had another index here, which kind of gave, at the time, all of the different titles that were used for the big tabs. And they were color-coded with green meaning a title card, blue meaning a secondary reference back to a different title card, and red was the prominent subjects, such as Pandavas here, or Srimad Bhagavatam. These are major topics. Mahaprabhu up here on the top. So the purpose of this video was actually to share with the devotees what I feel is something that is really worth preserving. I'm not going to live forever, and I have a house filled with all sorts of things, maybe not quite as prominent as this, and I suspect a lot of the other devotees have things like this. And my question is, where's all this stuff going to end up? Some people have said that I should turn my house into a museum, and I'm perfectly willing to consider that. My purpose of making this presentation was not only to kind of give people a little bit of a history of what we did in the early days before we had, what do you call it, cell phones, and you could pick up Bhagavad Gita and you can immediately find a verse and study whatever you want to study. But I have all sorts of things on my property, including the Kalki Avatar statue that came from LA. Suhas was kind enough to donate it to me many years ago.
Life size.
It's life size. There's actually the original fake Kalki statue. I think most people may, if you're in LA, you know it's full size. It's like 6, 8, 10 feet tall, something like that. And then I have Krishna Balaram, I have Buddha, I have Garuda. I have lots of artwork in the house. And I don't have any offspring, and I'm not really sure what's going to happen, and I'm trying to make plans for when I finally eventually take my last breath. So I'm inviting devotees to send me their suggestions, and maybe we could team up and do something. I do have a little bit of resources. I've offered to, in the past, I've offered to maybe donate this to some library or somebody who's collecting this kind of stuff. It's certainly a point of interest. Right now, the only library that I know of, which is really more of a library and not so much of a museum, I know when I went to Bombay for the reunion in 2018, I was very impressed. They have a very big library there. I gave them a lot of my charts. I think they have them too. I don't know if this would be appropriate for that, but this is the kind of thing that I made this video for, was to start the conversation and to see if other devotees have some suggestions as to what we should all do. All the devotees. I know everybody has their collection of books, and usually these are rare books. Where are they going to end up? So with that, I would like to thank you all for your patience and enduring my longer than it probably should be expose here, and wish everybody the best, and all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.